I'm Richard Porter.
I'm Jonny Smith.
And this is On the Other Side of Things, the Smith & Sniff spin-off in which we answer your questions. Your questions answered, once again, on a Friday. Shall I start?
Go on, I dare you.
I'm going to start with this one, which is confusing because the name that pops up attached to the email is not the name that the listener has signed off with. So
Okay.
Let's go with the sign-off name. This is from a listener called George.
Okay, George.
And George says, it was Sunday night last night, pre-8 p.m. I was already in bed, braced for another night of broken sleep with a small baby in the house. Rather than being smart and getting an early night, I instead researched K-trucks.
Of course,
That's totally normal. Of course, we've all been there. More specifically, the Daihatsu Hijet, which Jonny did a video on not so long ago.
Oh, yeah. I did the Jumbo.
I can't...
4x4.
Yeah. I can't stop dreaming of one, but it would potentially be one of the most inconvenient vehicles I could buy in my current stage of life. Only 2 seats, never go off-road, and use motorways regularly.
No, just don't. Please don't.
Maybe the UK importer could extend the single cab and fit an extremely safe child seat cage in the load bed so the 3 of us can traverse the country in the harmony of a sub-700cc 3-cylinder engine. Unfortunately, if I did buy the truck, I would surely be divorced. So my question is, what is the most inconvenient car purchase you've ever had? One that's detrimental to how you live your life. Feel free to extend this out to friends/colleagues if there are any good ones.
Well, I in the last 3 years since becoming a single parent, I've definitely done stupid things where I've bought several 2-seat cars when I know I've got 2 children. And yes. And it is idiotic. There's nothing other than idiotic, and it's annoying. I even looked with my insight. In fact, I spoke to Gordon Murray at great length about it when I was interviewing him, and went on a real sidetrack by saying, "Do you think I could make a 3-abreast arrangement on my Honda Insight?" And he actually came outside and looked at the cabin of the car. And I said, well, I was thinking I could use the 2 runners, and make like a bench seat or something. And he went, and he just went, no, you can't do that. No. And I think the combination of having a centre console and floor shifter, if it was column auto, maybe, but...
I love that engineering maestro, Gordon Murray, sort of sucked air in through his teeth like your local builder and went, nah, mate, nah, not going to happen, that. Nah.
I think he just...
the whole plan.
Yeah, I think he was just like, look, if you're going to that effort, you might as well just go for a completely different car. And of course, the Honda FRV has a 3-abreast front seat. I've got to go to a scrapyard one day and buy the front seat setup of an FRV with the runners. I want to put it in something one day. I don't know why.
I mean, width is your friend/enemy here, surely, because like I think an FRV is going to be much wider than your Insight, for example.
Yes.
It's quite a wide car, the FRV, wasn't it? It was almost like a cube. Not a Nissan, but like literally a cube, because it felt so sort of wide to its length.
It was quite cubic
from some angles, but and quite a lack of tumble home, much like the Multipla. Oh, that's the secret to a 3-abreast car, isn't it? Don't have too much tumble home, because then you can move the outer front seat people sort of right to the extremities of the car.
Yes,
and they're not twatting their head on the window or the rail above it.
Yes.
But I don't think, have I ever done an inconvenient car purchase? I mean, I suppose when I bought my Defender, I was originally thinking I'd get a 110 because it's more practical as a family car. But then I was like, but I lived in London at that point, and a 110 is an unwieldy beast on city streets, or it can be. And mainly because the turning circle's cack. And so I was like, well, I'd love to be a 90 then. And it's fine. My kids are very little at the time. In fact, my daughter wasn't even born.
I was going to say, did you have both children?
No, just the older one. And so it was okay because at that point, now hang on, he would have been 2 at there. So you could sort of put him into the back through the tailgate, and then I guess he was in a rear-facing seat, but belted in because there's no ISOFIX. That's the only thing. So I suppose it wasn't totally practical, but we did have another car. So, you know, if we're doing a long trip as a family, you wouldn't probably do it in that. Gosh, I don't think I've absolutely ever completely screwed my life. Not like there's a mate of mine who bought a 911 Turbo, a 996, and he absolutely adored that car, and then replaced it as his kids. He has 2 kids, and they were getting older, but he was still like, they could still go in the back. They could still go in the back. It's fine. I think he got a 997 because he was just not going to quit the 911 Turbo habit. But his second daughter was still small enough to need sort of putting in a seat and belting in and all of that sort of stuff. And he was doing that one day and his back went twang.
Oh, no.
And it was part of a series of back issues that, in fact, just the end of last year, he's had to have really major surgery on his back.
Because of the 911 booster seat fitment?
I don't think it was entirely because of that. You couldn't, but it was definitely one of the pivotal moments in the story of his ongoing back problems was his refusal to sell the 911 because it was still a perfect family car for 2 small children, and it caused his back to go ping.
Do you know, I was just thinking when this question was asked about all the cars I've had that might be a bit daft whilst being a parent, but actually, a long time ago, when I had my first Mark I Granada, I remember I actually regaled this story 2 days ago to my nephew to just remind him that, don't worry, you're young and about to start driving. I've had some really stupid cars, you know, and that makes me cool, I think. I bought this Mark I Granada, and it was about an inch off the ground. I'd say it was about an inch off the ground without anybody in it. And so I brought it home, and it did actually catch some cat's eyes out on the way home when I overtook a car. My dad just looked at it and he went, "You can't, it's just not drivable." I said, "Oh, yeah, it is." You know, this is me like 19. "Yeah, it is." I had to drive that, or I drove that car every day as my only means of transport for 3 years, street parked it in a city, the city of Chester. And I had to map in my head, because this predates sat-navs, had to map out in my head all the no-go areas, all the roads which were just undrivable. And there was so many. I had to drive the wrong way round a city, you know, like the long way round a city to come into the city a certain way so the car didn't get stuck. I mean, it's so, as the Americans would say, it's such a dick move having that car as your only car. And then I borrowed some money off Dad, and I had hydraulic suspension fitted, my first Lowrider. So it was more practical, but it still, every day, was a pretty serious thing. I remember driving home with a front puncture once and lifted the front wheel off the ground, a la Citroen DS, because I couldn't be asked to change the wheel at the side of the road. And one time we had biblical floods.
Wait, hang on. You adjusted your lowrider suspension so you could 3-wheel it home because you couldn't be asked to change a motor. That's brilliant. I did. It was a city commute, so it was only slow. I 3-wheeled it home. I got pulled over by the police once, and I thought, oh, they're going to absolutely do me. Because I can't remember, the car was at a janky angle, and they said, "Is this your car?" You know, that usual thing. "Yeah, it is." Yeah. They went, "Well, look, it looks great. We just wanted to pull you over because we wanted to look around it because it looks amazing." And I'm cautioning you for looking great in a build-up area.
So yeah, but I remember we had biblical floods one week, and I actually managed to put the suspension up so high, because on full height on the Granada, it was about the height of a Hilux. It was really high. And I drove through floods that only SUVs were able to go through. And I got to work on time, and people were like, "How'd you get to work?" I'm like, "In the Granada, it's out there." Mm-hmm. And I was very proud of that. So it went from being ridiculously...
Does that car still exist?
It lives on a Greek island, and it got rolled. So
What?
it exists. The car is still there, but it's a donor for another Granada.
If you'd given me a year to try and guess the fate of that car, it lives on a Greek island and it's been rolled, would still not have come into my head. I started getting really silly.
I love that tale.
Yeah, it's in the former Yugoslavia, but it's used as a pizza oven. It's in Sweden, but it's been welded to a Citroen Diane.
To this day, Rich, I sold that car to buy an American car, and I've had several American cars since, but I actually still want a Granada again. I keep going back to a Mark 1 Granny. I just really like them.
One day.
Well,
look, we should do another question.
We have.
I've got one in the chamber, if you like.
I
see. It's from a listener called Ben Oliver. He says, "Hello, you Bram Strokers." Very good. I haven't heard that one before. That's good.
That's very good.
I just bought a Yaris Verso 1.4 diesel manual. Find another, Ben says.
That is such a thrift car. The Verso's the one with the very high forehead, isn't it?
It is, yeah. He says, find another. First to see will buy. Doesn't need welding brackets. It needs a lot of welding. Anyway, I was browsing through the owner's manual and noticed that it had a 6-disc changer available as an option, but not ticked on my car, or presumably any other Yaris Verso ever made. I found an old 6-disc changer and a cable for it online, and have been looking up workshop manuals on how to fit it. However, when I bring this up with anyone, they look at me bemused, wondering why I would want to fit a 20-year-old CD player to a car when I could just get a new head unit. So my question is, are you obsessed with keeping things OEM like I am, or is there some point where it's just madness?
Ben, you're a hero.
He says, don't even get me started on the charming lo-fi sat-nav. And he's sent a picture, and I remember these sat-navs in Toyotas. It's basically standard, maybe it's slightly deeper, but near as damn it's a single DIN-sized head unit with a tiny screen with a black and white map that's absolutely microscopic.
It's like Game Boy graphics, isn't it? It's not really
Yes,
backlit.
It's exactly that. Yes, sort of actually quite detailed as tiny black and white screens go, but still.
I kind of like that
comical
because I think we've reached the point of madness now with stuff. But that, so right, I used to be all for upgrades. Take the old stereo out, put everything newer and better in. But since I've seen this really big resurgence of interest in probably 90s cars, 80s and 90s cars is when it really kicked off. It's people wanting the authentic audio experience and the right aesthetic on the head unit.
Yeah.
And as such, the market's become really collectible. Even old car phones are quite collectible now, aren't they?
Yes, yeah, they are.
So, and I think it's cool. Is it akin to somebody that collects vinyl and just puts on a turntable in their lounge occasionally with a nice cold beer and just enjoys?
I don't know,
traveling back.
It's almost in the sense of fitting 20-year-old technology when you could have something a bit better. It is a bit like, you remember when they re-released all the Beatles albums in mono?
Yeah.
Only about 10, 15 years ago. And it was a bit like, and of course, real kind of vinyl collectors went mad for this because it was like, oh, it's so authentic. But actually, of course, it's worse. It's
yes.
like it's not, as a friend of mine who's a real muso pointed out, it's not how the Beatles wanted you to hear those records. It's how a lot of people had to hear them at the time because the technology didn't allow any better.
Yes.
But that's not how the band or George Martin wanted you to be hearing their very careful production work. So, I mean, personally, I'm a bit OEM obsessive to the extent that, I'll be honest, as a old school Defender owner, I fucking hate modified Defenders. I think it's mostly because I think they look shit.
Well, tell it like it is, Rich.
That's the thing. I don't mind good modifications, but I think too many modifications, they do not match the car.
Yeah.
Car design is bloody difficult, and there's a lot of subtlety to it. And things like wheels and grills and body kits from the same design studio that did the overall car are usually very carefully considered so that all the radiuses and the details and the surfacing or whatever else it might be is in tune with the car itself. And the aftermarket quite often misses that nuance and it just looks toss. But even, you see an otherwise standard Defender, and because this kind of trend for fitting absolutely gash fake wood-rimmed 3-spoke metal wheels, and they make me gag. They're so horrible. And the standard wheel in Defender is, it's actually quite nice because it's got a thick rim to it, but it's an old Discovery wheel with a different boss on it. But it just sort of suits the car because it was designed by the people who did the rest of the interior. And although, the dashboard in Defender's a right old mishmash of the old Montego and Rover 800 and God knows what other bits, it sort of feels it's all from the company that made it. Yeah. And the exterior as well, but it's not just Defender. So when I had my Panda, the guy that sold it to me said, tip for you. You can get a modern stereo off Amazon for, 35, 40 quid. And he said, I've put one in one of my other Pandas. It's perfectly good. It goes in. All you need is an aftermarket surround that'll adapt single DIN because the factory stereo is double DIN. Mm-hmm. Or you can spend a bit more money and get like a double DIN stereo, but it's all touchscreen. And it'll do CarPlay and it'll do everything else, And I did neither of those things because I didn't like the way they looked. I liked the OEM stereo because the plastic surround is the same colour as the rest of the dashboard because it was done by the people who made the car.
Yes.
And so the stereo needed changing, and I just wait until one came up on eBay that was the right spec and put that in, even though technically that's a worse stereo than I could have had for less money. And I did think, what is wrong with you? Stop being such a pedantic twat. But it really mattered to me that I couldn't bear to look at sort of mangled, because the aftermarket surrounds to make a single DIN stereo fit, they're just not quite right. The plastic's the wrong texture and colour, and it just looks shite in my view. So
yeah,
I couldn't do it.
They are quite bad. You need that's where you need a friend with a 3D printer that you can then carefully sand it back.
Yes.
Prime it, paint it properly.
Now, funnily enough, I went and drove the 2CV shop Darren's Honda Beat the other week. And a previous owner, not Darren, had made a bit of a mess of the interior of that car. And it's got a bloody great hole where the stereo should be. Now, the stereo from the factory is shaped to fit the dash, but that's long gone. Previous owners just bodged this horrible sort of fascia that's too wide for the hole so they could get a single DIN stereo in. What a lot of people with Beats do now is someone does 3D printed things that fit the hole, because you can't normally get a standard width stereo in. They put marine stereos. Have you seen these?
No.
They're sort of portrait aspect rather than landscape.
Marine stereos.
But they're not very tall. So they're sort of just like a little rectangle. And someone figured out that it's a radio and it's got Bluetooth and it's just meant for boats. So they fit those, and then you put a 3D printed surround in, and it's quite neat, and that gives you a more modern stereo. And I was thinking, if I owned a car like this, that's not what I would do. Because the 3D printed part, again, it's the wrong texture and colour, and it would just annoy the shit out of me. I would rather fly to Japan and buy a factory spec stereo at a cost of thousands of pounds than have to look at some 3D printed surround in my fascia. And I realised that's not right. But so anyway, to answer Ben's question, yes, I'm totally OEM, and it's a burden and a curse.
Ideally, what you want is an OEM-looking head unit, even if it's the old one that's sitting in the hole, but it might be disconnected or remodified behind the dash.
Yes.
Which has the likes of Bluetooth and MP3.
I love it when they do that on a classic car. There's like a head unit that looks totally period, but then you open the glove box and there's, essentially it looks like there's the server room.
Yes.
From a modern office in there.
I like that.
And it's fine. And that's okay. I'm not like totally, absolutely militantly OEM. I think if stuff fits in, like those lovely Becker stereos that they do, that are sort of retro looking but have modern features.
Yeah, they're bloody great, they are.
Or the ones that Porsche offer as official accessories, because Porsche have done them, and Porsche designed the Porsche that you're sitting in. So they know how to make a modern stereo look authentic within the dashboard. And so it's on a case-by-case basis, but yeah, I'd say I'm a bit of a stickler for OEM, and feel free to call me a twat.
No, I get it. And I've done both, and I appreciate both. And actually, to that end, my Allegro Street Sleeper, it's not quite the stereo side of things, but it's the instrument cluster. I'm actually having it remade to look the same as what it currently is on the Allegro, with some very, very subtle tweaks so that it runs off a modern CAN bus aftermarket ECU and that Honda engine, but through the British Leyland dash binnacle, so that the fuel gauge still is fuel, and I'm putting in a rev counter in there which will work properly. And all of those things, which is much harder and more expensive than just going, do you know what? We could just put a screen in there which just sends the information to a touchscreen. But no, that would be easy. And big shout out to Peterson, who are a company who just does that. They repurpose gauges, and they do it for for retro electric vehicles and, like Resto Mod piston cars, and very cool.
Wow.
Very, very detailed. Nice. Anyway, can I ask a question?
Well, yes.
Or on the behalf of somebody else.
Yeah.
There's a chap called Greg Davis who's contacted us. I don't think it's the very funny, tall comedian Greg Davis, but it might be. Hi, you pair of SSGs. With the recent discussion of Vauxhall Fronteras up mountains, I was reminded of another Frontera story from when I moved into my current neighbourhood back in the early 2000s and all that. By the way, this is titled, this email, Frontera Double Trouble, which immediately drew my eyes. On the driveway of a house just down the road was not one, but two identical Frontera Spoats. Both were the same year, and at the time couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old. Incredibly, both were painted in the same shade of non-metallic yellow that used to be the preserve of British Telecom Maestro vans off of the 80s. I used to pass these cars every day and often wondered what would have motivated the owners, who I think were a retired couple, to plump for this unlikely pair of automotive doppelgangers. To butcher an Oscar Wilde line, to buy one yellow Frontera may be regarded as a misfortune. To buy two looks like carelessness. Amazingly, a couple of years later, the two Fronteras disappeared from the driveway on the same day to be replaced by, drum roll, two completely identical white Skoda Octavia estates.
What?
So odd. Have either of you ever come across this kind of bulk buy approach to car ownership? And do you know why some people do it? CMTMB, Greg, basically in Northampton. Well, you know what? The place where I keep my place where I keep my cars, where I've got the sort of late break show workshop, which is Ignition Cars and Coffee. The guys, I hope they don't mind me saying this, but the guys that run it, James and Lewis, they also run an engineering business together. And they decided to buy their company cars at the same time. And they're both hopeless, in their words, not mine, hopeless Maserati and Alfa Romeo fanatics. So they bought a pair of Alfa Tonale plugins, FEVs.
Oh.
And they really champion them. They like them. They like them a lot. So they drive around in the same cars. And bearing in mind there aren't many tonales about, toenails.
No.
I see two on a regular basis.
Are they the same colour?
I think they are the same colour. I'm sure they're the same.
You're colourblind, so you probably don't clock it.
No, probably don't. But
I'm just saying that so the listener understands, because when someone says, I think they're the same colour, it's a bit of an unusual thing to say. But yes, I guess, because I saw a Tonale a couple of days ago, and it was such an unusual event that it stuck in my mind. I think I might have actually said in my head, oh, look, there's a Tonale.
Yeah, I sort of do that even when I see them. I can't wait to see the Junior. I haven't driven that car yet, but that's another story.
I think I've mentioned ages ago on the podcast, there used to be a house, there was a house near where I used to live, where they had two identical Honda Accord estates.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know the really flat back hearse-like one?
Yeah, my favourite one.
Well, they had two of those, both silver, but on sort of consecutive number plates, as if one person in the house had bought one and the other person had gone, I really like that. I'm going to get one as well. Yeah, I like it so much. I'm going to get one on my own. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. But I could see that. In terms of bulk buying, though, there was a family lived down our road when I was growing up, and the dad, Bob, he was a dentist, but he loved a coupe,
Bob,
even when he had
dentist.
kids. I mean, again, he was like my mate with the 911s. He was gearing up for a back twanging incident because he had Capris when we were little. His son was the same age as me, and a mate of mine. And his dad had Capris. I think he had a 3-litre Capri initially.
Of course he did. He's Bob the dentist.
Bob the dentist. It's not a very dentisty car, though, is it? Somehow
it's not a very dentisty name. No, I don't think. You sure he was a dentist, or was that a cover up?
He wasn't my dentist. I never saw any evidence of this. I was just told in good faith by my parents that Bob was a dentist. So maybe not. I don't know.
Bob the dentist. Can he buy a Cooper?
His wife Pat was quite glam in a way. But she had a Renault 4, which again didn't quite fit somehow. It's a bit too sort of rustic.
Mm.
You'd have seen her in some kind of Capri. She could have been a Celica lady in a way.
Yeah.
But no, she had a Renault 4. And then, from memory, Bob, I had, I think, 2 Renault Fuegos on the bounce.
Oh, wow.
So you will never really see what's coming next. They're now a full Renault household. Fuego, possibly even a turbo. I think he had a red turbo. She had this increasingly faded Renault 4. And then one day, the Renaults were gone. And on the drive, a pair of Seat Ibizas.
The early ones, engine system
The first
Porsche,
generation.
or whatever it said on the side.
Exactly. The system Porsche ones, a red one and a white one. They were both top spec. I think it was the SX or SXI even.
That's very cool.
But they were identical spec, except one was red and one was white. And I think they just went to the Seat dealer and there were deals doing, and they went, screw it, we'll have 2.
That's brilliant.
And that was it. And they just had identical cars bought at the same time.
I think years ago you used to get neighbours buying the same cars because they'd be impressed by their one's car, and they go, oh, well, maybe we should get one of those. I don't know if you do the same colour. That might be a bit annoying. But it's funny you should mention, actually, Fuego, because there's a letter which has come in regarding a Fuego, which I'd like to quickly read, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'd like you to read.
From a lovely man called Matt Baker. Hey up, chaps. Johnny's tale of Korean car talk whilst having something akin to a drum kit in his back passage reminded me of the time I had to have an endoscope. I can never remember how you say it. Endoscopy. Endoscopy. That's it. It's one of those ones.
There we go.
Endoscopy.
Forgotten again now. Endoscopy.
Listen, mate, endoscopy. I'm going to have an endoscopy. So, the endoscopy involved inserting what I was promised was a small camera down my willy. His words, not mine.
Oh, God.
Wow. Whilst the surgeon was carefully inserting the camera and what felt like a full crew of a Top Gear special, he took the moment to ask what I do, at which, at the time, I was in the motor trade. He then proceeded to ask me if I could help him find a Renault Fuego, which apparently was his dream car as a young doctor.
Hang on, what year was this?
It must be a long time ago, but I'd love Matt to elaborate. So, apparently it was his dream car as a young doctor. He was very insistent, though, that it had to be a Fuego Turbo, and until now he'd only been able to find good GTXs. This might be recent then. I wanted to tell him that the Fuego was an awful thing, which, if found, would end in bitter disappointment, and that he should really find a good Mansa instead. But whilst he was holding little Matt and a sharp GoPro, I didn't have the nerve to mention that. My question, though, is for Richard. Have you ever been asked about cars at an uncomfortable or awkward moment? And if so, could you please share your story?
God.
Cheers, mate. Thanks, mate. Bye, Matt.
Sort of years ago, 20 years ago, I found a lump on my eggs, if you follow me. Get them checked. Check them yourself, chaps. And if there's anything that concerns you, go and get it checked out, is my advice. Because that's what happened to me, and it turned out to be fine. But it might not have been, and I was glad that I went and saw a doctor. But what actually happened was, of course, there's a process. Now, the thing is, and this is where the NHS is magnificent, because when it's something that's potentially serious, they do not muck about. And I went to see my GP, and straight away they went, right, you should go to hospital. Get this looked at properly by a specialist. And what actually happened, because it wasn't immediately clear what was going on, is that I had to see various people at various times for various different inspections and ultrasounds and stuff. And I became quite unembarrassed for a brief period about just dropping my trousers in front of strangers, to the extent that at one point there was a consultant or whatever he was, who went, I've got some students accompanying me today. Do you mind if they stay for this? And I just went, yeah, fine. And there were 3 young people there. 2 of them were women. And I just went, no problem at all. Do you want to see my bollocks? And but at one point, this wasn't in front of the students. This was a solo thing. There was a consultant, and he was just making small talk. And he went, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I write about cars for a living." And he went, "Ah, okay." And then there was a pause. There was a pause for a bit too long, where I thought, "Okay, he's not going to do anything with that information, and why should he?" And then he went, "What do you think about BMWs?" I was like, for this point, this is sort of coincided with him then applying his rubber glove but still quite cold hand to my plum sack. And so I was sort of like, well, I suppose it depends which model you're talking about. But the 3 Series is obviously a good standard small executive saloon. And I didn't know how much information he really wanted, or if he was just trying to think of something off the top of top of his head.
Did you feel like a radio DJ where you didn't want any radio silence, so you just kept talking?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I found
exactly
that out when the bloke was asking about the BMW iX3 whilst rummaging in my there. So yeah. Oh,
well, I mean, I'm loath to do this, but if anyone's got an amusing story of an embarrassing car conversation whilst being intimately examined by the medical profession, then hello@smithandsniff.com. That's probably it for this one. But once again, chaps, if you've got any concerns about your plums, do get them looked at.
Well, or your back door, frankly.
Or that, yeah. Or anything, really. I know men stereotypically are very bad at getting medical complaints looked at, but my experience of this is that it's better if you do.
I agree.
And on that quite serious note, it's time to end, but we'll do this all again next Friday. Normal show on Monday. Until then, goodbye.
Bye, everyone.